Today is July 29th, 2008. We're in beautiful Sun Valley Inn, Sun Valley, Idaho. We're here today to interview Judge Lloyd George in a brief oral video history to supplement a longer, more complete audio oral history. I'm Rita Haeusler, and I'm here on behalf of the 9th Judicial Circuit Historical Society. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Rita.
We'd like to start with your early life. You had a very interesting beginning in Las Vegas, Nevada. Could you tell us about that?
Well, I actually was not born in Las Vegas. I was born in a little town in Idaho, but I moved to Las Vegas in 1933 when it was a tiny little city, I think in the entire county, probably fewer than 5,000 people. There was no air conditioning, nor even evaporative coolers at that time. But it was a pleasant city, and I grew up with good people and really enjoyed it. At that time, there was only one high school in Las Vegas. It was Las Vegas High. And we had, in my judgment, marvelous teachers in both grade school and high school. The revitalizing what is called the old Fifth Street School, and I've been asked, as many others have, to participate in that. They're going to dedicate the new Fifth Street grade school this early in September.
Could you tell us a little bit about your parents?
Yes, my parents were not educated people. They were from kind of a rural community in Idaho and Wyoming. My mother was from Star Valley, Wyoming. My father was from Montpelier, Idaho. That's a little town. He went only to the 8th grade. My mother did not graduate from high school. She left school when she was a sophomore. But I think that was kind of the pattern of the day. My mother is a very insightful lady and had a number of leadership positions. My father was a stutterer, a terrible stuttering problem, and but a good father and supportive. We didn't have much by way of means and so forth, but we didn't know any different, and so and a lot of people were quite poor at that time, and so I had a pleasant childhood. I have a brother living and a sister, and had a little brother who died when he was 8 months old. But the family is very close, and my brother then went on to school and graduated from a university, and he taught school for a number of years in first the second high school that was built in Las Vegas, Rancho High, and then he finished at Votech, and he's a wonderful brother. My sister is a wonderfully pleasant, delightful lady, and she has reared a great family.
Okay. Were your parents role models for you in terms of your later education and legal career?
You know, my folks really were not insightful about education, and they didn't. My mother was encouraging. My father, I can't say he was indifferent. He was happy when I went on to school. And at that time, there was no university in Las Vegas. And so I did my undergraduate work at Brigham Young University, and I think I got a good education there, and knew a lot of people who I later had some contact with, and had a good experience at BYU. President Wilkinson, who was the president of the university, was a lawyer, and an outstanding lawyer who had a law firm in Washington, D.C. And I was able to get to know President Wilkinson very well. He was an aggressive guy, and in my judgment, what BYU is today owes a great deal to President Wilkinson. Just to give you some idea about President Wilkinson, when I graduated from law school, I decided to go back home. I had a couple of opportunities in California, but I decided to go back home, and a call came in, and my secretary answered the phone. And President Wilkinson, I'm sure you've never met him, but he was a very aggressive guy. And she came in to me and she said, Mr. George, there's Ernest Wilkinson on the telephone. Will you talk to him? I said, sure I will. He's the president of the university. So I got on the phone and I said, hello, President Wilkinson. I've got a nickname that a lot of people call me, including presidents of universities. And he said, hi, Duco. He said, are you practicing law? I said, yes, I am, President Wilkinson. He said, are you enjoying it? I said, yes, I am. And then this is just the way he said the next sentence. He said, how much is that little law firm you're working for paying you? And I said, President, they're paying me $800 a month. And then he said, you're too expensive for me, Duco. Goodbye. That was the entire conversation, and that was his way. And he continued to be a very good and supportive friend until he died.
What would you say was the greatest influence on you in terms of entering the law?
I think something that had an influence was and this is not critical, but my father's speech impediment. I spent quite a bit of time speaking, and I had some leadership positions and different things. And I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer and try to perfect whatever speaking talents I had. For example, in high school, I was asked to speak at a gathering that involved Western Airlines. And I spoke, and the president of Western Airlines came up after, and he said, what profession are you going to follow? I said, I think I'll probably go to law school. And he said, good, I've got our lawyer here, and I think you ought to talk with him. Well, I spoke with him. It was not a great speech, but he gave me a lot of encouragement. And so I pretty much decided, I was a senior in high school, that I would go to law school. That was kind of the deciding moment.
Interesting. I understand you had a lot of interesting jobs before you entered college in Las Vegas. What did you do?
Well, I had a lot of little jobs. I mowed lawns, and then all through high school, I had a job in the Bank of Nevada, and they gave me some pretty important responsibilities, even though I was the mail boy. They would let me run batches and do various things. In those days, silver dollars were used like chips in the downtown hotels. There really were only a couple of hotels on the Strip. And there was no armored car service in Las Vegas. And the president of the bank, a guy named Claire Sutherland, who was a very talented guy, asked me to call a taxi and go to the post office where money was transferred at that time. And I would go to the post office once a week and would pick up, to start with, about 25,000 silver dollars and currency. And we would take it to the bank that was probably only about 3 blocks away, and then we would take it inside the bank. Finally, when we got up to about 35,000 silver dollars, the taxi wouldn't move. 1,000 silver dollars weighs about 50 pounds, and it was too heavy a load. And so I called President Sutherland and said, the taxi won't move, what should I do? And he said, why don't you rent a truck? And there was only one transfer company in town, and it was owned by the Wadsworth brothers, and they sent this truck over, and it had no sideboards at all on it. And we would stack the silver dollars, and by the time I finished high school, I was probably getting 50,000 silver dollars. And I would sit on top of that stack of silver dollars, hold the currency in my arms, and then we would go over to the bank. The Bank of Nevada, incidentally, was owned by the Bank of America. Later, there was a large lawsuit called a Transamerica lawsuit that prevented out-of-state banks from owning banks. The Bank of America, incidentally, was originally named the Bank of Italy. Mm-hmm. Did you know that?
I did know that, yes.
I see.
Started in San Francisco.
Yes, and San Francisco was their headquarters. Claire Sutherland eventually became a senior vice president in that office. But I would do that and never had a moment's difficulty. When I was a senior, somebody came in with a used armored car, and they started to use armored cars. And they've had problems ever since. For the 4 years that I was going in taxis and trucks, didn't have any problems at all.
Yeah, well, an armored car, I guess, is a big target. They assume there's a huge amount of money on there and not in a taxi.
I suppose
That's
so.
very interesting. Tell me a little bit about your early law practice once you actually got out. We know you went to a small firm, or at least the president thought so.
All firms were small at that time. Were you speaking about the experiences that I had when I was in college?
Oh, perhaps. I don't know.
I think that's probably the most interesting part. I was the lifeguard after my first year at BYU at the Flamingo Hotel. I got that job because a classmate of mine named Paul Sedway, who was a very bright fellow, who eventually went to the Harvard Law School and graduated there, he didn't like the practice of law, and he eventually went to Berkeley when I was going to law school at Berkeley. But Paul was a good friend, and I went over to go swimming, and he said, I don't know if you know, but I've been drafted. He said, this is really a good job. He said, I can make $1,500 a month. Most of it, of course, is on tips. He said, if you would like this job, and you would like me to talk to my uncle, whose name was Sedway, I'll be happy to do so. In a couple of days, I'm the lifeguard at the Flamingo. And from that point forward, I didn't have to work in school any longer. I could save enough during the summer that it would support me. The next spring, I had a call from the man who was a high official, I think, with the Sands Hotel. And he called and said, Lloyd, we're opening a new hotel. It's going to be called the Sands. And I understand you're a wonderful lifeguard. And I minded my business, but that's the most I can say. He then hired me, and I was able to make a good living there summers. And he either felt sorry for me or he liked me, but he hired me through my undergraduate work, and it was a scholarship that put me through my undergraduate program. Would you like me to tell you about some of the people that I met?
Absolutely. Be very interested.
Well, I met a lot of really important people. The Sands was, I think, probably the classiest hotel of its time. And one of the main entertainers was Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra was a tremendous entertainer. He was a little hard to deal with nobodies like me. Mm-hmm. And he always had a secretary with him. He called, or she called, one day and said, Lloyd, would you bring back a couple of chaise couches and an umbrella for Mr. Sinatra? And I said yes, and to bring it back to a part of the hotel named after a racetrack. Well, I took the two chaise couches back and an umbrella, but I noticed that the umbrella didn't work just right. And but I knew I needed to get back to the pool. The hotel unit was probably 100 yards from the pool, and I went back, and a couple of people who worked at the swimming pool were there, and they were from the South. I still remember his name, Roosevelt Williams, a wonderful young man, said, Miss George, he said, Miss Sinatra just called, and he wants FOMO chairs and a screwdriver. Well, as you know, I'm a Mormon, and a screwdriver has always meant a tool. Mm-hmm. To me. That isn't at all what Sinatra had in mind. And but I couldn't find a screwdriver, thank goodness. And so I stacked up these 4 chaise couches and hiked back there. And Mr. Sinatra was sitting there at the time, and he said, what the hell, Kitty, you're going to have a party back here? And I said, no, Mr. Sinatra, I understood you wanted 4 more chairs and a screwdriver. I was prepared to tell him I couldn't find a screwdriver, and he didn't give me a chance to finish. He said, nobody can get anything straight around this GD hotel. He said, I called up and asked for 4 beers and a screwdriver. Well, even a dumb Mormon kind of wondered what he meant by screwdriver. I told that story to a friend of mine who graduated from high school, whose funeral I spoke at about 6 months ago. He said, "Boy, I'm glad he didn't ask for a Bloody Mary." But